For nearly a century, Boeing stood as a titan of American industry, synonymous with pioneering aerospace engineering and unwavering safety. From the iconic B-17 to the revolutionary 747, its aircraft connected continents and pushed the boundaries of human flight. This legacy cultivated immense trust, a foundation built on meticulous design and rigorous testing. Yet, in less than 5 months, 2 catastrophic crashes involving its state-of-the-art 737 MAX airliner shattered this global confidence, leading to an unprecedented worldwide grounding. How did an aerospace giant, revered for its heritage, create a crisis that would redefine modern aviation safety and cast a long shadow over its storied reputation? This is the core question we seek to answer. The story of the 737 MAX begins not with innovation for innovation's sake, but with intense market pressure. By the early 2010s, Boeing's European rival, Airbus, had launched its A320neo, an updated version of its popular single-aisle jet, featuring new, fuel-efficient engines. This immediately put Boeing at a significant disadvantage in the lucrative narrow-body market. Airlines, driven by soaring fuel costs, were eager for more efficient aircraft. Boeing faced a critical choice: embark on a costly and time-consuming redesign of an entirely new aircraft, or quickly re-engine its highly successful, but aging, 737. The decision, as reports indicate, was to pursue the faster, less expensive path of adaptation. Adapting the 60-year-old 737 design for modern engines presented significant engineering hurdles. The new LEAP 1B engines, manufactured by CFM International, were considerably larger and heavier than their predecessors. To maintain ground clearance, engineers could not simply place them in the same position. Instead, the engines were mounted higher and further forward on the wing. While achieving the desired fuel efficiency, this modification altered the aircraft's aerodynamic characteristics, particularly at high angles of attack. As some pilots and engineers later noted, this change introduced a tendency for the aircraft's nose to pitch up under certain conditions, a crucial detail that would directly influence subsequent design decisions. To counteract the new aerodynamic tendencies, Boeing introduced a software system, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS. This system was designed to automatically push the aircraft's nose down if it detected an excessively high angle of attack, thereby preventing a stall. Crucially, MCAS was intended to operate in the background, making the MAX handle similarly to previous 737 models and thus avoiding the need for extensive pilot retraining. This approach aligned with Boeing's promise to airlines that the MAX would require minimal additional pilot certification and training, a significant selling point in a competitive market, but one that would soon come under intense scrutiny. The decision to treat MCAS as a background system directly impacted pilot training. Reports from investigators later revealed that critical information about MCAS's existence and operational details was largely omitted from pilot flight manuals and training materials for the 737 MAX. This meant that pilots, even experienced ones, were unaware of a system capable of autonomously controlling the aircraft's pitch. This commonality strategy, aimed at reducing training costs for airlines, became a focal point of post-crash investigations. Critics argued that prioritizing cost efficiency over comprehensive pilot knowledge sowed the seeds of future disaster, undermining the very trust Boeing had cultivated. On October 29, 2018, just months after the 737 MAX entered service, Lion Air Flight 610 plunged into the Java Sea shortly after takeoff, killing all 189 people on board. Initial investigations by Indonesian authorities immediately highlighted unusual flight control issues. Data from the flight recorder indicated that the aircraft's nose repeatedly pitched down autonomously, despite pilots attempting to counteract these movements. While focus initially fell on maintenance records and sensor reliability, the catastrophic pattern of an uncommanded nose-down input would soon become chillingly familiar, signaling that something far more systemic than a single mechanical failure might be at play within Boeing's newest aircraft. Following the Lion Air crash, aviation authorities and Boeing began to investigate, yet no immediate directive for grounding the entire fleet was issued. Boeing did release an operations manual bulletin for 737 MAX operators, advising pilots on how to handle erroneous angle of attack sensor readings, which could activate MCOS. However, the bulletin did not explicitly mention MCOS by name, referring instead to runaway stabilizer procedures, a generic term that pilots were already familiar with. This omission, coupled with the lack of comprehensive MCOS training, left many pilots unprepared for the specific and aggressive nature of the system's malfunction, raising questions about Boeing's transparency and the effectiveness of its initial response. Tragically, just 4 months later, on March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed 6 minutes after takeoff from Addis Ababa, killing all 157 people on board. The similarities to the Lion Air accident were immediate and stark: a brand new 737 MAX, uncommanded nose-down inputs, and a struggle by the flight crew to regain control. This second disaster made it undeniable that a systemic flaw, rather than isolated incidents, plagued Boeing's latest aircraft. The global community watched in horror as families grieved, demanding answers and accountability from a manufacturer once held in such high regard. The question of how became a desperate plea. In the immediate aftermath of the Ethiopian crash, an unprecedented global response unfolded. While the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, traditionally a leader in aviation safety, initially resisted, nations worldwide began grounding their 737 MAX fleets one by one. China led the charge, followed swiftly by Europe, Australia, and eventually, the FAA itself. This collective decision, stemming from a fundamental loss of confidence, sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. It was a stark repudiation of Boeing's assurances and a clear indication that international regulators no longer trusted the manufacturer or its primary oversight body to ensure public safety. The crisis escalated from a technical issue to a profound crisis of trust. Investigations into both crashes eventually pinpointed MCOS as a central factor. What emerged was a deeply troubling design flaw: the system relied on input from only a single angle of attack, AOA, sensor. If this lone sensor malfunctioned and sent erroneous data, MCOS would repeatedly activate, pushing the aircraft's nose down without the pilot's knowledge or sufficient means to override it. This single point of failure, coupled with the lack of pilot training on the system, created a scenario where pilots were effectively battling an automated system they didn't even know existed, with devastating consequences. The simplicity of this critical oversight defied decades of aviation safety principles. Beyond the technical issues, the investigations quickly broadened to examine Boeing's internal culture. Reports, including those from congressional inquiries and whistleblower testimonies, suggested a shift within the company. What was once described as an engineering-driven culture, prioritizing safety and innovation, had reportedly transformed into one increasingly focused on cost-cutting, production targets, and maintaining a competitive edge at all costs. Employees described immense pressure to expedite the 737 MAX development and certification, with some alleging that safety concerns were downplayed or ignored in the rush to market. This narrative directly challenged the image of a meticulous manufacturer. The crisis also shone a harsh light on the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration's certification process. For years, the FAA had increasingly delegated aspects of aircraft certification to the manufacturers themselves, a practice known as Organizational Designation Authorization, ODA. While intended to streamline the process, critics argued that this system created a conflict of interest, allowing Boeing engineers, under pressure to meet deadlines, to effectively police their own work. Investigations later found that the FAA's oversight of MCOS was insufficient, with critical safety assessments being missed or inadequately reviewed. This raised profound questions about the integrity of the regulatory framework and the balance between industry trust and independent scrutiny. At the heart of many decisions leading to the crisis was a perceived imperative to cut costs. The choice to re-engine the 737 rather than design a new plane was a cost-saving measure. The minimal pilot training requirement, which relied on MCOS being a background system, was pitched to airlines as a way to avoid expensive simulator training. Even the design of MCOS itself, relying on a single AOA sensor instead of a more robust, redundant system, was a simpler, less expensive implementation. These decisions, while economically attractive in the short term, ultimately proved devastatingly costly in terms of human lives, financial penalties, and a profound loss of reputation. This demonstrated a troubling trade-off where safety was implicitly compromised. Boeing's initial response to the crisis was widely criticized as slow and inadequate. There were perceived attempts to downplay the severity of the software issue and to shift blame, at times, towards pilot error. This approach further eroded public and regulatory trust. The company eventually replaced its CEO, Dennis Muhlenberg, and embarked on a comprehensive effort to redesign the MCOS software, implement new safety checks, and overhaul its internal processes. The financial impact was staggering: billions in lost orders, compensation to airlines, and legal settlements. But the human cost, the irreversible loss of 346 lives, remains the most profound consequence, a constant reminder of the stakes involved. The path to recertification for the 737 MAX was arduous and spanned nearly 2 years. Boeing developed significant software updates for MCOS, making it rely on input from 2 AOA sensors and activating only once. New pilot training protocols, including mandatory simulator training for all MAX pilots, were also introduced. Regulators around the world conducted independent, exhaustive reviews, scrutinizing every aspect of the aircraft's design and software. While the aircraft eventually returned to service, beginning in late 2020, the recertification was not an end to the story, but rather a cautious step towards rebuilding a shattered reputation, under the constant gaze of a skeptical public and aviation industry. The Boeing 737 MAX crisis served as a profound wake-up call for the entire aviation industry. It exposed critical vulnerabilities in aircraft design, regulatory oversight, and corporate decision-making. The investigations highlighted the dangers of prioritizing speed and cost over safety, and the consequences of a fragmented regulatory environment. While Boeing is committed to a renewed focus on engineering and safety, and regulatory bodies have vowed to enhance scrutiny, the question of trust lingers. Can an institution as vast and complex as Boeing truly change its fundamental culture? The legacy of the 737 MAX will undoubtedly shape the future of aviation, forever reminding us of the dark truth behind a broken trust.